Hey guys, tonight we're taking a journey so absurd that it's like waking up in a Victorian novel while simultaneously being trapped in a circus tent full of misfit clowns. We're diving deep into the world of the Victorians, a group of people so creatively mad they accidentally poisoned themselves daily, all while wearing layers upon layers of crinoline. So, before you settle in, please take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you really enjoy what I do here. I'd love to know where you're tuning in from, and spoiler alert, what the modern world's like from your cozy couch. Now, dim those lights, turn on a fan to give that warm summer breeze, and find a comfy spot where no ghostly Victorian can reach you. Ever wondered how many layers of clothing they wore? Why they thought arsenic was a beauty treatment? Why away with the default soup recipe? Was it truly a good idea to attend a party with no bathroom? Or is that just Victorian charm at its finest? Well, congratulations. You've just woken up in 1870 amid a sea of questionable hygiene practices and staggering floral wallpaper. Hold your nose, it's going to be a wild ride. You wake up to the faint sound of horse-drawn carriages clattering past, and a fresh wave of floral perfume assaults your nostrils. Or is it just the damp smell of mildew from the sheets you forgot to wash last month? Either way, it's time to peel yourself off that lumpy mattress, a feat that requires more agility than a Victorian lady in a corset. You stretch your limbs, your back crinkling like that horrid parchment you can't seem to throw away. The first challenge of the day is to discover if you're stuck to the sheets from sweat or some mysterious goo, and let me tell you, the odds are never in your favour. As you waddle to the window, the air hits you like a brick wall of dampness. Outside, the sun battles with the thick fog that drapes over the land like an aunt's most unfortunate quilt. You squint at the passing carriages, perhaps peering in hopes of spotting someone less unfortunate than yourself. But every face staring back is just as dreadfully Victorian, their day clearly starting off with an ambitious level of misery. You take a second to contemplate. At what point did morning stop being an invigorating time of day and turn into an exercise in sheer endurance? Now, it's time to address the issue of breakfast, a morning event as exciting as watching paint dry on a bathroom wall. Traditional Victorian breakfast fare looks shockingly similar to whatever pieces of decay might be found in the back of your pantry. All you need is a rusty spoon and a good set of lungs to make it through pancakes that feel more like paperweights. Ah, yes, the glorious sight of a bowl of cold porridge stares back at you. A sticky reminder of the previous day's regrets. You take a cautious spoonful as if it might fight back. You chew thoughtfully, wondering how many lives you've already given up by simply ingesting this mystery concoction. In this brave new world of Victorian breakfast traditions, oatmeal is less of a meal and more of a test of loyalty to your own stomach. True, a dash of molasses may help, but how spontaneous can you get when the only spice aboard is the ever-elusive hope of not hurling everywhere? Post-breakfast, you think, surely it can't get worse. Spoiler alert, it does. Now it's time for the daily grind to begin, and your attire awaits you with all the enthusiasm of a damp crow. Dressing in the Victorian era is akin to wrestling a bear covered in lead. The layers you put on reflect not only fashion sensibilities, but also your commitment to discomfort. Each layer must be pulled on, tightened, and manoeuvred as if you're preparing for battle. And to think, history will only remember how great you looked while you suffered. Your wardrobe beckons, and you become a victim of its whims. That corset you promised yourself to take a break from becomes tighter than your best friend's grip on her purse at the market. Breathable fabrics? Common sense? Those are too forward-thinking for the likes of you. Instead, you feel like an exquisitely wrapped sausage, ready to roll into the streets of London but praying no one includes you in their daydream about flying. At last, you manage to assemble a look that's equal parts aristocrat and dilapidated scarecrow, time to face the world outside your rather musty sanctuary of gloom. However, before you make it to the door, a flock of dust bunnies seem to take a collective gasp of disappointment, as if you've betrayed their home. The sacred ritual of domesticity has once again been interrupted by your sheer refusal to clean. Perhaps they would joyfully get involved in your daily life, like a bizarre version of the best roommate one could ever wish for, bundled in layers, absurdity, and moments of creeping doubt. You finally summon the courage to open the door. You step out, only to have that initial glamour of morning fade away faster than a fresh batch of lemon scones. The street's rhythm is hesitant yet eager, and the pungent perfume of horse dung serves as a delightful reminder that humanity is alive and well, although the concept of hygiene might still remain in question. Out here, morning gives way to its own traditions of awkwardness, emotions, and the pain of their own kind. It's all enough to make you wish you'd just stayed in bed, now battling patrons at the market who all have an opinion on everything. Judging by the sweat forming in your armpits, this life may not be suited for the faint of heart. But aren't we all just clinging on like a delicate flower in a storm of Victorian chaos? Breakfast is laid out with all the enthusiasm of a Victorian children's party, which means you're immediately haunted by imagery of sludgy porridge and mysterious meats. Is that bacon or a relic from last week's funeral? But do you really care when your only other options are boiled potatoes or the ever-elusive something green? You gaze at the fare before you, an array of dishes so uninviting it could double as a horror movie set, complete with its very own suspenseful soundtrack. As you prepare to fill your plate for momentary sustenance, you realise the only drink available is a sickly sweet something they claim to be tea, but tastes suspiciously like poorly brewed pond water. You take a sip and feel as though you're swallowing clouds of despair mixed with the residue of last week's biscuits. You certainly can't be expected to survive the day on this concoction of regret. The milk sitting on the table may as well be a century-old relic. It's bordering on a state of sentience, silently judging your life choices while you find yourself pleading for a simple cup of coffee. As you chew through the lukewarm porridge, a workout for both your jaw and your gag reflex, you can't help but wonder how many Victorian poets wrote entire sonnets dedicated to the struggles of breakfast. Why is it that food designed to fuel the day feels like a test of endurance instead? Every mouthful seems to mock the very concept of nutrition as you blend it with thoughts of courage and grim resignation. You figure if you stop thinking about it, maybe it will stop tasting so horrendous. What did the aristocrats of this age expect anyway? High tea at dawn. Meanwhile, the sound of a pervasive clanking groans from the kitchen as your Victorian maid attempts to prepare even less palatable gruel. The kitchen, reeking of onions and burnt bread, serves as both doom and hope. Though your meal is devoid of flavour, it is filled with the quiet terror of knowing it could be much worse if the cook was feeling particularly adventurous. You glance nervously toward the scullery. Are they attempting another culinary experiment destined for the annals of kitchen disasters? After what feels like a lifetime of endurance, you spot the jams on the table, one labelled strawberry marmalade and the other simply mystery. Your curiosity piqued. You realise mystery might be the most appealing form of breakfast you'll encounter today. Just as you prepare to excavate your breakfast with something resembling excitement, you overhear your neighbour, Lady Glitternight, muttering something about how one must always dine upon the essence of decay, referring most likely to her meal, or possibly to her conditions in marriage. In Victorian society, breakfast is not merely a meal, it's an event surrounded by layers of complex social interactions, surpassing even the mundane act of eating. You measure everyone's fortunes based on their breakfast choices, silently judging your peers while half-heartedly chewing through your rubbery eggs and trying to avoid eye contact. Would it be too scandalous to wear a bib and recoil at the cultural faux pas that is bad toast? Shame reigns supreme when Lady Glitternight presents any leftover scraps of uneaten breakfast as tangible evidence of a soured reputation. Heaven forbid she should be seen asking for something as bold as ketchup. Instead, you ensure your plate is barren of leftovers, despite what you'd been made to endure for the past 15 minutes. With every morsel, a persistent rhythm of awkward small talk surrounds you like a cloud of unsavoury aromas, a veritable parade of blathering compliments about stale bread and the grotesque spectacle of half-eaten bacon bits. The conversations float about as nourishing as the overcooked sausages. And let's not forget the essential topic of discussion. Who died recently, and did they starve to death? As you manage to finish your culinary fiasco, you stand to depart the breakfast table with a sense of quiet dread. Well, at least hindsight will make for excellent stories later. Ah yes, breakfast. A festival of chaos served on a porcelain plate. Perhaps breakfast is less a meal meant for sustenance and more an initiation rite into the absurdity of Victorian society. You join your fellow brunch club in a unanimous aversion for breakfast, which may compel new members to stay away all in an effort of self-preservation. With a fragile sense of resolve, you move toward the day ahead, hoping to find some semblance of brunch that might, just might, turn this day of chaotic breakfast around. Donning your coat, a deep breath fills your lungs as if to say, "Here's to surviving morning etiquette and the breakfast of regret." Dressing is like preparing for battle. Layers upon layers of clothing are required. Cotton, silk, lace, an entire flock of feathers, and hey, is that a hint of arsenic in your dress? Nothing screams decadence like a potential toxic fume or a disabling corset. But fear not. After a half-hour struggle, you finally look like you belong in a painting, even if your legs have gone numb. As you stand there, more pinned than a butterfly in a glass case, you can't help but wonder if the style is worth the sheer agony. The room around you is a riot of colours, fabrics, and the occasional leaky shoe, turned into a mini arena for fashion combat. The first step, of course, is the corset. It's the dam that holds back a fountain of enthusiasm against the backdrop of societal expectation. As you lace up tighter than a Victorian girdle on a Sunday morning, you question why anyone would voluntarily partake in this form of torture. Is it really that alluring to have the waistline of a wasp while your ribcage feels like it's fighting for air? You might even wonder if your outfit is a modern metaphor for emotional repression. But then again, who has time for deep thoughts when you're busy staving off asphyxiation? Once you've struggled into your corset and emerged victorious, the layers begin to unfold. A petticoat goes first, because nothing says I'm relevant quite like walking around in a mini hot air balloon made of ruffles. The tool screams, "Look at me!" But all you can hear is your own heartbeat thumping against the unforgiving boning of your corset. You pull it over your hips like a flamingo stealing your dignity while trying to remain elegant at all costs. Next is the dress. The good news, it's stunning. The bad news, it weighs more than a small child. Adorned with ruffles, beads, and perhaps a hint of lace that was clearly designed for a braver era. You shuffle around like an awkward crab that accidentally wandered into a ballroom. Each step feels like moving through a swamp of fabric, and it's a wonder how anyone manages to dance in these outfits, unless they consider whimpering a form of art. Now comes the outer layers, The shawls, wraps, and capes that might make you feel like royalty, or an unfortunate courtesan in an over-the-top play. Chic is the goal, but sweaty, suffocating butterfly is more the vibe, especially as those pesky feathers, real or otherwise, tickle your nose at the most inconvenient of moments. You're left dodging the errant puffs of down like you're in a feather-filled game of dodgeball. Don't forget the accessories. It would be criminal to neglect the jewels. Pearls, diamonds, and brooches trying to outshine each other can elegantly exacerbate neck pains you didn't realise you signed up for today. You might even contemplate if they were trying to weigh you down to see how far you'd sink into Victorian vanity. And shoes. Yes, the final deadly touch. They're stunning. Undeniably, but designed with the sole, pun intended, purpose of inspiring a newfound appreciation for ground-level ventilation. They're usually about as comfortable as walking barefoot over sharp rocks. Each step is a lesson in humility, as you hobble like a Victorian version of Cinderella minus the sweet ending. As your feet scream and your corset threatens to plunge your ribcage into your stomach, you finally clomp your way before the mirror, proud of the grotesque magnificence reflected back at you. As you turn to leave, the door creaks open like an ancient ship. Perhaps this outfit was not just about aesthetics, it was a bold statement. With each layer, you're challenging the social norms, bearing your very soul. Figuratively, of course. Just remember, the moment someone compliments your outfit is simultaneously the moment you realise you can no longer breathe. In this absurd performance of Victorian fashion, you can't help but revel in the mystery of it all. Not only do you leave the confines of your bedroom adorned like a priceless painting, you also carry the weight of expectations and the sweet perfume, toxic or otherwise, of ambition. So, trudge forth into the day, fashion-forward and suffocated. After all, a little discomfort is a small price to pay for the fleeting moment of looking marvellous, until you need to sit down, that is, when all bets are off. Because nothing says graceful like tumbling into a chair and exhaling as if you've just crossed a finish line in a race no one else is running. What a way to say goodbye to your dignity and hello to another day dressed for despair. Let me know when you'd like to proceed with the next segment or if there's anything specific you'd prefer. Let's talk toilets, a marvel of modern engineering or a draconian medieval structure. The outdoor water closet is calling, but it's less modern convenience and more survival challenge. You might as well bring a map and some snacks while dodging mud puddles that could serve as Victorian quicksand. Yes, you heard me right. This isn't just a trip to relieve yourself. It's a grueling crusade just to find a semblance of privacy and slightly better air quality. Picture this. You stroll through your garden flanked by roses, hoping to find the elusive ahem, porcelain throne, with nothing but a thin wooden shed between you and the great outdoors. Inside, you're greeted by an air freshener that clearly went out of style with the Great Plague. It's cold as a crypt, and you shiver in your knickers as you contemplate whether this counts as outdoor exposure. It's not exactly a moment of serenity, more like a game show called Survival of the Fittest, Toilet Edition. And let's not pretend this is a solo venture. While you're squatting at this lovely outhouse designed for maximum discomfort, the neighbourhood rats are live streaming your ordeal to the other critters in the area. Hey, look, it's Mrs. Puddleton. Bet she regrets that third piece of pie now. It's a theatre of the absurd where the front row seats are free, to the crows feasting on last week's breadcrumbs from your porch. Once you've precariously balanced your dignity along with your lower abdomen's demands, it's time for the follow-the-rules part of the experience. Yes, shout garde-lou before you get rid of your waist. That's right, it's the 19th century version of heads up. You're not just tossing refuse into the street, you're essentially booking first-class tickets to confirmation as a public nuisance. Ever wonder why people preferred their indoor plumbing when they finally got it? Well, because making a spectacle of yourself was never a good look, and you could also lose your invitation to the fancy summer ball, and let's discuss the fantastic herd of insects ready to welcome you with open wings. The flies seem to recognize your presence and are better at social networking than you are. A vivid cloud of buzzing chaos descends upon you, ensuring your moment of relief interrupts like a bad guest who missed the no talking about politics memo. The aroma of your recent breakfast lingers in the air, enhanced with the earthiness of the shed, creating an ambience that somehow feels both nostalgic and revolting. Once you've bravely completed your quest and gathered the courage to stand up, you'll face the next delightful challenge: wiping. Forget ultra-soft toilet paper, you've got seashells, unravelled rags that have seen better days, or, if you're particularly lucky, actual leaves that feel more like sandpaper than silk. Really, what about this makes it better than cold soup? The unprecedented risks of infection loom, larger than your self-respect. Eventually stepping back into the light, you'll find your neighbours engaged in the age-old pastime of gossip. The moment you emerge from the confines of your humble home, it's evident you're a hot topic of discussion. Did you see how she trudged over there? What a fine display of unconcerned bravado. Forget about privacy. It's a badge of honour to get through such internal strife unscathed. If you're lucky, your pants will remain unsoiled, while the rest of the town remains blissfully unaware of your close brush with chemical warfare. Days and nights roll on, and with every trip to that outdoor Catholic, you find yourself more and more connected to the larger, more absurd tapestry of life in Victorian England. At least every time you slip on your boots to gather your courage, you conjure up the kind of gallows humour that keeps you sane in a world more bustling than the local bazaar. And who knows, should you happen to encounter your neighbour again at a soirée, you could regale them with your heroic tales of survival against impossible odds. So if you ever questioned the harsh realities of the Victorian toilet, remember it was just one more obstacle in a day dedicated to achieving, if nothing else, the undeniable pride of being alive, albeit under some rather smelly and uncomfortable circumstances. And now, you too can appreciate the modern comforts you have. Indoor plumbing? Thank your ancestors. They played the real-life horror game so you wouldn't have to. Cleanliness. So very crucial yet so very misunderstood. You know that feeling when someone asks, "When was the last time you washed?" Well, that's essentially Victorian life. Turns out regular bathing was considered unhealthy. Why not embrace the beauty of filth and use it to distract from your existential dread? In fact, many Victorians believed that washing could open your pores to all sorts of diseases, as if a splash of water could cause a nasty infection faster than you could say, "mildewed sock." So, while you might be dreaming of a hot soak in a luxurious tub, prepare to be confined to living with the comforting stench of unwashed wool and the ever-looming fear of contagious maladies. You start your day with a colleague boldly declaring, "A clean house is a happy house," while the scent of horse dung wafts through the window from the street outside. But you know they're just trying to distract themselves from the pile of laundry in the corner that resembles a miniature Mount Everest. Forget spring cleaning. It's more like spring hiding of things you'd much rather not speak about. Even if one could summon the courage to scrub the floors, not that easy when a cup of good tea costs more than it takes to bribe the neighbour's cat to oversee it. But the cleaning tools. Let's not downplay the magnificent arsenal of Victorian cleaning equipment designed to do one thing: promise cleanliness while simultaneously launching another level of your daily suffering. Enter the dusting glove, a charmingly useless accessory that only kicks up more dust while you attempt to glamorously wave goodbye to the grime. But why worry when you can simply apply a fairy sprinkle of good intentions and pray to the gods of tidiness? Now let's talk about your wardrobe. Whoever told you that clothing options are the key to a happy life definitely wasn't a Victorian. The layers, wool, silk, cotton, each fabric claiming a different superiority over the others, while conspiring to create a sauna effect by mid-morning. Trying to get dressed in one of those corsets feels like wrestling an angry octopus. You finally manage to yank it into place only to discover you can't draw breath, let alone ensure you haven't inhaled enough dust to start a family with it. So, laundry day arrives, and what do you find? What was once a beautiful dress quickly becomes a crime scene among the laundry baskets. There you stand, attempting to wash your rags in a tub that might as well be a wishing well, just as deep and just as dirty. After some arm swinging and soap splashing akin to a child with a garden hose, you realise this will be the day filth triumphantly sings its victory hymn over cleanliness. But let's not vent too much spleen on the miserable subject of personal hygiene, because who needs clean clothes when you can return to the age-old tradition of wearing your finest party dress until it's practically an artefact? Thankfully, contributing to the elegance of Victorian messiness is the glorious invention of a good old scarf. Not only does it hide all unsightly stains, but you can also conveniently use it to dab the tears of despair when you've realised that the last bath you took was probably in the same century your gown is from. And how about sharing a bath? That's a delightful adventure meant purely for the brave. Bathing with family often seems more like a family therapy session, gone wildly off script. At least you might finally resolve once and for all the long-standing debate over who hogs the soap. You're all knotted up together, and as you splash and cackle, reminded of your community spirit. Though I'd wager the community spirits involved are likely hanging around the open sewer outside just waiting to say hello. But here's a surprising silver lining. While you're merrily wallowing in your shared filth, bonding over the pungent aroma of body odour, it turns out that the Victorians' distaste for bathing has instilled a certain rugged charm. You've become a rare breed, an individual proudly sporting the scent of 1,000 roses and the lingering essence of last week's roast. Call it style. Call it panache. You're ready to tackle the grand world outside, if only to prove to the aristocracy that there's beauty in neglect. So, here's to the Victorians, those champions of questionable habits and the guardians of dirt. They faced the world head-on with filth and flair, reminding us all that sometimes looking pristine is simply a facade that masks the grittiness of real life. And as you inhale that slightly rotten smell wafting through your window, go ahead and embrace your ancestry. After all, there's a delightful charm in hastily pretending you're too good for a shower. Cheers to you, darling. May your days remain delightfully filthy. You'd think lunch would be a pleasant affair, but nope. Whether you're noshing on stale bread or what's left of last week's mystery meat pie, every bite feels like a gamble. Winner gets indigestion, and the loser ends up in bed with a questionable case of I might have parasites. The mere act of finding lunch is a spectacle. You wander outside in search of something resembling nourishment, which is akin to rummaging through a dystopian dumpster. The streets are an endless parade of stalls, each one vying for your attention with promises of the freshest and the absolute best. You just pray it doesn't come with a side of botulism. The air smells of frying onions, coarse spices, and just a hint of, why not, something that was definitely alive at one time. The vendors, working tirelessly, seem to think that hissing fat in a pan is enough to convince you that their offerings are worthy of your hard-earned shillings. You sidle up to the stall with the bravado of a contestant in a terrible eating competition, all while weighing your options. Do you risk the fish pie that your gut tells you has been swimming a little too long? Or should you go for the stew that looks like it might have been closer to the animal at one point than you'd like to admit? It's also time to talk about bread. a staple of the Victorian lunch, if you could call it that. A loaf is usually rye, dense enough to double as a paperweight, and it required more negotiation with a knife than an aristocrat requires to gain favour at court. You either have to soften it in your soup, chew it till your jaw feels like it's about to break, or savour the fact that if you do manage to bite through, you'll need a dentist soon, and not just because they're running a clearance deal on extractions. And what about sides? Let's take a moment to appreciate Victorian vegetables. The greens, if you find any, have been steamed into oblivion, a colourless mush that resembles more of a mystery sludge than anything fresh. Is it broccoli, or simply a wilted salad that's been left out a tad too long? You take a tentative nibble, instantly regretting your life choices as you wonder if the local rats have had better meals than this. But feelings of regret don't just stop with the food. In Victorian society, what is consumed is scarcely as important as how it's consumed. During lunch, the table becomes a battleground of unspoken rivalry, with every lady and gentleman attempting to outdo one another in both refinement and restraint. There's always someone daring enough to munch on something that resembles a real meal, while the rest of you nibble calamities, carefully avoiding those nasty glances of judgment from the lady across the room feigning a look of disgust. To add to the mix, lunchtime conversations are a cocktail of scandalous gossip, enforced politeness, and the occasional awkward silence. Did you hear about Lady Featherbottom's unfortunate incident with her goldfish? Becomes the most fascinating topic of conversation, with every listener feigning concern while secretly wondering if the fish was a code for something vastly more scandalous. Those idle chats are punctuated with the clinking of silverware that somehow manages to sound like the tolling of a death knell, signalling that your meal might also lead to your eventual demise. The clock strikes noon, and you begin to realise that what might have been a delightful midday feast is more like a pathetic prank played by fate. The idea of returning to work looms over you like a dark cloud. You're now battling not just your stomach, but your own existential dread about how nothing you've just eaten could possibly bode well for your afternoon. In the back of your mind, you're strategizing. Avoid the pudding that was definitely devised as a secret test of faith, or succumb to your fate. But what a deliciously silly fate it is. And just like that, lunch fades into a blissful memory that might soon turn into a nightmarish recollection you're destined to hold. All the preparation, the anticipation, and the sheer relief of having gotten something in your belly will soon be eclipsed by the haunting knowledge that all of this was a prelude to either pleasure or peril. So as you make your way back to your tusks, holding your stomach with the vigilance of a sentry, just remember, you survived lunch. And truly, isn't that what the Victorian era is all about? Finding humour and heartburn in every caffeinated moment, while you gratefully avoid thinking about what tomorrow's lunch would entail. Victorian social gatherings resemble an Olympic event for the self-important elite. Spend an evening pressing palms while trying not to mention that horrendous rumour about Lady Featherbottom's pet raccoon. It's a precarious balancing act of propriety, and with any luck, you won't end up accidentally challenging someone to a duel. You enter the drawing room, a vast expanse adorned with floral wallpaper that might as well come with a disclaimer. Caution, eye-popping colour may cause discomfort. The air is thick with the scent of expensive perfume and the sort of stale pastries that the host assures you are just as delicious as last week. Yet, like many things in Victorian life, you know better than to trust anything that's been sitting longer than a particularly astute gossip. The chattering begins before you even put down your hat. Is that Lady Frizzlebottom discussing her latest trip to a spa? Or is she attempting to drown everyone in her extravagant tales until they forget their own existential crises? You can't tell, because everyone speaks in a language precise enough to cut through the air, but convoluted enough to leave you utterly confused. Oh, darling, did you hear about the Duchess of Toadsworth? Apparently she took a beach holiday and was seen eating a steak. Why in the world anyone wants to drudge up steak talk at an event meant to showcase the latest lace shawls is beyond your grasp. Perhaps it's all part of the plan to distract you from that inexplicable odour, drifting from the tulip arrangement in the corner. After several awkward introductions and dodging a few too many inquiries about your own marital status, the clinking of glasses fades in. Ah, yes, drink. The lifeblood of conversation. You cautiously accept what they insist is fine sherry, although it tastes surprisingly like someone dipped an old rag in vinegar and called it a day. A beautiful example of Victorian optimism, you tell yourself. Nothing defeats the horrors of networking like a glass of something vaguely alcoholic. You toast, a resounding cheer to mediocrity. And then, out of nowhere, you overhear the following while trying to find solid ground at least under 1 foot. Heard Lady Bicklebottom's been promoting her husband's new invention, a machine that makes toast with pretty patterns. Oh, how adorable! Oh, for the love of all that is Victorian! You think to yourself that toast machines sound delightful until you realise they lead to a conversation about preserving the family lineage through increasingly ridiculous contraptions. Oh dear, let's not forget the lovely Lady Fitzhugh, you hear someone declare. She's rumoured to have invented a contraption for creating gently bowed flower arrangements. The need for validation lies at the heart of these gatherings, and no invention, no matter how ridiculous, should go unrecognised. You finally encounter genuine laughter when the topic shifts to Sir Pennywhistle's last accidental public incident. Apparently he lost his balance while attempting to deliver an inspiring speech on the importance of proper fabric choice in men's undergarments. The tone shifts from genteel laughter to unabashed storytelling, complete with exaggerated motions to emphasise how far or how close he landed to the piano bench. Okay, closer to the awkwardly placed parlour cat who now seems jealous of all the attention. Cats have it easy. They don't have to bid on invitations or decide which bonbon goes with what gossip. As the evening wears on, your legs feel like they've stood both the test of time and a rather wobbly tea table. Someone insists it's time for the nightly round of guess which esteemed guest dined with a goat, a game that frankly makes the goat sound a lot more like a solid conversationalist than most of these so-called socialites. With every new round of crude jokes and drudgingly informative anecdotes, the glow of the gaslights flickers, casting sharp shadows that dance like the host's sanity. As you covertly plot your escape towards the nearest exit, you can't help but admire the sheer absurdity of it all. A night spent on the delicate edge of societal anxiety, where the only way to win is to survive. So, when the clock strikes an appropriate hour and the room begins to swirl with a mix of polite goodbyes and not so subtle hints about future gatherings, somewhere far, far away, you realise you've navigated the treacherous waters of Victorian social life. You've successfully avoided controversy, courted uncertainty, and come out with your dignity, well, mostly intact. As you step into the night, let the cold air wash over you like a promised liberation from this delightful absurdity. Ah, the Victorians loved their fashion. Let's reminisce about cravats, bustles, and excessively tall hats that defy gravity and common sense. But beware, these ensembles are less about looking good and more about restricting your ability to breathe, think, or even see. Picture yourself squeezed into a corset that, let's be honest, is less like an accessory and more like an Iron Maiden designed to crush your will to live. As you lace up that contraption, you realise you're not just getting dressed. You're undergoing a trial that would make a medieval torture chamber look like a spa day. Now, let's discuss the hats. They were not merely adorned. They were monuments of dubious engineering. Some resembled small bird sanctuaries, complete with feathers that could fly away and skirts that insisted on taking their own path. women strutted about town with headwear that could collapse from its sheer height if someone sneezed too hard nearby. You might find yourself hoping against hope that a gentle breeze won't send your hat soaring into the next millennium. And what about the skirts? The infamous bustle added an impressive back end to any woman, making every entrance feel akin to a royal unveiling. Let's face it, when you turn around to greet someone, the back of your skirt might constitute its own address. The bustle was a statement, but one that also asked, why walk when you can waddle? You'd find it nearly impossible to navigate tight spaces without risking unintentional damage to furniture and the spirits of your fellow partygoers. Men didn't have it easy either. The morning coat, often made from several yards of heavy wool, created a silhouette reminiscent of a harried bellhop from a hotel that never existed. Tightly fitted trousers, known as pantaloons, were designed for confidence, but often resulted in puffed-up egos and potentially embarrassing moments when bending over. Just imagine trying to pick something up off the floor, only to discover that your legs are now trapped in a man-made sausage casing. At any Victorian gathering, you might be shocked to discover that everyone was wearing some form of elaborate accessory. Instead of typical jewellery, you might see people sport what looked like small dioramas clipped to their chests. Brooches were more about showcasing your lavishness than your love for someone. If you weren't wearing a piece of jade the size of your fist, had you really attended the soiree? Did you know that pockets were practically a myth? For both genders, most clothing had small hidden compartments, reminiscent of secret stashes for treasures or snacks, or perhaps what was left of your dignity. Can you imagine fumbling around for your handkerchief, only to discover your non-existent pocket is actually just a decorative adjustment to make you feel even more like a sculpted statue? Adding to the absurdity, the Victorians welcomed the concept of morning attire. For those blissful hours before noon, a gentleman could dress down. If you count exchanging a fully waistcoated look for a slightly less fully waistcoated look as dressing down. They believed that nothing said, "I'm productive," like loosening their buttons while sipping tea, ultimately convincing themselves they were well on their way to a productive day, while still relating more to the couch than to their purpose. Of course, clothing wasn't merely a personal statement. It was a class identifier. The fabrics they wore told you who was important and who wasn't. You might board the morning train mistakenly thinking you're travelling with a bunch of gentlemen, only to find out you've seated yourself next to an aristocrat in satin so fine it whispered secrets to you. The cotton-clad masses were left to question. Was hygiene held hostage to fashion? Or was it simply societal oppression coming in the form of ruffles and petticoats? Ultimately, living as a Victorian meant gaining all sorts of impressive skills. You mastered the art of laughing nonchalantly while chewing on something that could potentially be a maggot. You learned how to twirl your parasol while dodging the fumes of the industrial age. And through it all, you practically became an acrobat trying to navigate the world without toppling over due to stacks of fabric reminiscent of urban sprawl. So as you march through the sweltering streets of Victorian London, encased in layers of confinement, remember that beyond the facade of elegance lies a secret. The quest for comfort was sacrificed long ago at the altar of crinoline and couture. But hey, at least you look stunningly ridiculous while grappling with your own discomfort. A matter of style? Well, maybe, if you like that sort of thing. Victorians are the trendsetters of illness too. The Black Death may have been a few centuries back, but the ongoing obsession with tuberculosis is keeping everyone intrigued. The sickly chic is in, and nothing says, "I've got fabulous consumption," quite like a frail frame and sunken eyes. Today's merry social circles gather not just to boast about the latest fashions or the state of the horse market, but to engage in not-so-subtle discussions about their ailments. After all, what's more glamorous than casually dropping "I've been coughing up blood" into an otherwise mundane conversation? Picture this. You're at a lavish Victorian party, decked out in layers of silk while trying to seem graceful, even as you battle a windowless room full of stuffy air. Everyone is talking about growling stomachs, the latest remedies for that pesky gentle fever, or decaying teeth more rapidly than they show off their 25 varieties of cutlery. But perhaps the star of the evening is the guest who's perfected the art of appearing faint at the most dramatic moments, perfectly timed to draw gasps from anyone within earshot. Surely they win the ultimate sickly award for crafting a theatrical cough that transforms the room into a stage filled with spectators eager for details. You see, tuberculosis, the darling of the upper crust, has become the new black. It's akin to that limited edition handbag every fashionable lady is desperate to own. The symptoms are practically a fashion statement, a persistent cough, those delicate coughs behind gloved hands, and conversations punctuated by dramatic pauses to catch one's breath. The best part? A touch of rosy blush enhances pallor, making you the belle of the ball while still quietly bleeding internally. Ah, the irony. Everyone is obsessed with looking a little unwell, while secretly rallying for a more invigorating life. You simply can't hold a proper gathering without at least two guests dramatically clutching their chests and discussing that lingering tickle in their throats like it's the latest gossip from court. Forget seeking medical attention. The doctor might ruin your vibes with their pesky ideas about fresh air and veggies. If they dare suggest a long walk in the park for good health, you'll raise your chin and protest. After all, who wants to arrive at a soup kitchen dedicated to wellness when you could be surveying the latest funeral attire instead? But let's not overlook the equally fashionable accessories of this trend. The handkerchief. The daintily embroidered cloth becomes your trusty companion for dabbing away excessive moisture. You know, your body's way of reminding everyone that you too have mortality hanging over your head. You whip it out as you engage in the tedious task of nodding politely when someone suggests you try a tonic. With a slight wave and a pensive look, you declare that raspberry leaf tea might soothe your consumption while inwardly cackling at the idea of trying anything that might not have sugar. Things take a melodramatic turn when someone produces a portrait of a tuberculosis sufferer from the latest edition of Gothic and Glorious, etiquette being paramount. "Look, she was a lady of grace," they exclaim. "Pure tragedy and unrecognised beauty," they lament, holding the painting. A perfect porcelain-skinned figure who seems vaguely familiar. This jolts you into a state of existential dread, possibly teetering on the edge of a fainting spell while trying to emulate their effortless beauty. The press of society weighs heavily upon you, glimpsing the kick of romanticism layered over the horror of continuous coughing fits. As nighttime falls, you wonder if your pals would appreciate a gathering of lesser-known illnesses, or if you should rally for a twisted Victorian revival of alien abductions, where everyone competes for the title of best scare. Still, that cough lingers, the chest tightening with relatively little effort, and your friend models a fashionable black shawl to go with her funeral attire. After all, it's just better to be prepared. You conclude, leaning back into the shadows, that being sick doesn't just make you popular. It guarantees a sense of belonging in a world that's constantly craving drama, and you can't help but feel that nothing can rival the pleasure of crowding around the casket of consumption, whispering sweetly about who's next to ascend. Indeed, nothing says "I belong" like a light shade of blue, perfect for signifying that last breath before the mysterious arrival of life eternal. So, dear listener, when you wake up in your cosy modern bed, perhaps raise a glass of fresh water, or sparkling bubbly, as you leave the consumption trend behind, indulging in the joys that come with surviving past 30. Who knew the Victorian fashion for sickness could keep you breathing nicely into the modern age, all while comfortably encased in bedsheets devoid of mildew? Remember, they may have had their dramatic coughs, but you've got the upper hand. Today is yours, without compromising your health for the sake of chic. Ah, how Victorians travelled. Overcrowded trains with inadequate ventilation, horse-drawn carriages, or just good old-fashioned walking like peasants. Don't be surprised if someone ends up on your lap while dodging a pigeon. Every trip feels like a small assault, but hey, at least they weren't texting. The excitement of embarking on a journey practically vibrates in the air. Still, it's less a refined experience and more like being sardines stuffed into a tin can. If the tin can was rolling down a bumpy road fraught with malodorous bends and rebellious farm animals, picture yourself through the window of a steam engine, your face pressed against the glass while the landscape whips by, merging into a blurry watercolour of mud, occasional trees, and a startling lack of cleanliness. Everyone is packed in tightly, a delightful mix of smells, and by delightful, I mean you might reconsider your lunch choices upon inhaling an aroma that could only be described as cabbage-infused ambrosia. And if the sheer stench doesn't get you, the unrelenting heat will. Ah yes, the joys of railway travel. You could very easily find yourself engaged in a passionate debate with a stranger over whether it's the lack of bathing or the poor ventilated train cars that happens to be the source of all misery. Once you've successfully navigated the world of train travel, why not indulge in the timeless elegance of a horse-drawn carriage? Think of it as a romantic adventure, more like a rolling coffin filled with the idyllic sound of horse hooves, colliding with cobblestones, followed by the unfortunate soundtrack of someone's lunch, making a dash for freedom. Goodbye, vegetarian pie. While chugging down the bumpy thoroughfare, you can marvel at how the carriage sways back and forth with all the grace of an inebriated walrus, leading to the risk of discovering a very intimate friendship with your fellow passengers as they become exceptionally well acquainted with your elbow. Speaking of passengers, let's not ignore the sheer cavalcade of characters you might encounter during your travels. You'll meet everything from the indignant noblewoman who insists on speaking French, even when it's utterly unnecessary, to rappers clutching suspiciously large packages containing unknown bodily functions, even as they provide unsolicited commentary on life's latest dramas. Each interaction comes laced with tension, where rolling eyes and side glances replace dagger stares and desperate pleas for personal space. But wait, the complicated world of public transport does not end there. Let's move to foot travel, the trusty old standby. Yes, hoofing it through the bustling streets of London is, of course, a time-honoured tradition. However, don't be alarmed if an errant market stall or an angry dog cross your path at precisely the wrong moment. Every step takes you closer to discovering the true sorrows of footwear choices. Those dainty ankle boots might sparkle in the candlelight, but they will strangle your toes tighter than a Victorian matron's corset. Now let's add weather into the mix. Rain, muck, and windy gusts greet you at surprising moments, and whether you're dodging raindrops or swearing at a sudden downpour, journeys quickly go from charming walks in the park to mud-splattered, drowned rats that leave you feeling less than dignified. Yes, nothing says sophistication like preserving your dignity while struggling to remain upright on an iced-over cobblestone street. Despite the chaos, there's something utterly absurd and wonderful about how the Victorians moved about their world. Each journey was a beautifully orchestrated disaster, a dance of pleasantries and mishaps. So next time you hop into your shiny car or bus, luxuriate in the fact that your mode of transportation has the distinct advantage of not involving a horse's rear end. Sure, we still have our own modes of chaos, road rage, crowded buses, and endless traffic, but spare a thought for the Victorian traveller who might shake their head at your distress before plopping themselves back down in their poorly ventilated carriage, ready to buckle in for yet another delightful round of transportation terror. And there you have it, the madness of Victorian travel that somehow becomes a cherished blend of adventure and catastrophe, all wrapped in the floral patterns of the era. You finally arrived at a posh dinner party, where every morsel of food comes with a side order of social anxiety. Could the soup be alive? Will you choke on etiquette? Dinner manners are more important than the food, and really it's only a matter of time before somebody brings up the smell of horse shit wafting in from outside. Welcome to a Victorian dining experience, where the finest china adorns the table, but the ambience reeks of questionable decisions and poorly defined social hierarchies. As you step into the grand dining room, you're immediately assaulted by the scent of boiled cabbage mingling with the faint whiff of something that may or may not be your last meal. The centerpiece, a massive floral arrangement, looks dangerously close to tipping over and smothering the poor soul seated at the end. The room is filled with guests dressed in layers of silk and crinoline, all seemingly suffering from the same underlying concern: who will slip on the buttered floor first? Finding your place at the table feels like a game of musical chairs, except the stakes are higher, with potential damage to your reputation instead of your lower back. As you settle into your seat, you overhear snippets of conversation interspersed with polite laughter that could easily be mistaken for a group of hyenas. Did you hear Lady Tiddywinkle's horse won at Ascot? Oh, darling, have you seen her new bonnet? And in a triumphant crescendo, I believe that plant in the corner is actually a rare Brazilian fungus. Who knew such trivial matters could have so many layers, much like the 5 petticoats underneath your neighbour's dress? A violinist in the corner starts playing a reflective tune that sounds curiously like the chaos of your thoughts. You're torn between the exquisite oyster soup served in a delicate porcelain bowl and the existential fear that someone might ask you a question about your favourite fish. What if you've never actually tasted anything but fish sticks? Just when you think you might go for the soup to soothe your nerves, the host announces that the soup is actually a stunning concoction of, well, whatever's left in the pantry mixed with a hint of mystique. Great. You're already on the brink of questioning your life choices, and now soup is asking about its historical context. As the first course is served, people engage in what can only be described as cringe-worthy small talk. Isn't the weather such a delightful topic? Yes, because nothing says let's connect like discussing how many clouds are in the sky, and how they contribute to your impending doom. The only real question is how many of Sir Beaumont's homegrown tomatoes actually made it into the salad, versus how many were deemed too ripe and tossed into the pig trough. Remember that dinner rules dictate you must eat with grace, but as the main course arrives, a roast of splendid proportions, you find the meat looks suspiciously like it was once a neighbour's prize sheep. With chewing more reminiscent of a lumberjack cutting down a tree than a leisure activity, you muster every ounce of your courage and navigate your fork into what might be an actual life-or-death interaction with the pile of gelatinous mashed potatoes. As you desperately try to recall how to hold your fork properly while preventing an avalanche of potatoes from tumbling onto your lap, a voice pierces the air. Have you heard about the rumours swirling around Lady Chedwick? Of course you haven't. You'd much prefer to hear about the last time someone slaughtered a rogue goose. But alas, here we are at the crossroads of speculative gossip and a meatloaf-style jaw workout. Finally, dessert arrives. A marvellous array of sweet treats artistically assembled, each dessert with its own backstory. You learn more about the baking process than you ever thought necessary. pondering whether you should feel more intimidated by the cake's intricate layers or the life choices that led you to this frosted purgatory. "So dear, tell us about your family," a guest chirps, smiling genuinely, as if this were a moment of joy instead of your personal descent into embarrassment. Just as you cling tightly to your fork like it's a lifebuoy in choppy waters, someone knocks over their glass of wine, creating a waterfall of crimson that could rival Niagara Falls. The collective gasp is almost enough to make you feel better about your life. Almost. Because at the Victorian end of the day, while you may not have conquered dinner etiquette, you certainly conquered the ability to never return to such an event, armed with the knowledge that the elaborate charade of dinner parties is a tantalizing mix of scrumptious food, hidden agendas, and oddly obsessive discussions about cabbage, all wrapped in the stale air of social discomfort. So, for future reference, when evaluating dinner invitations, consider that nothing beats a night in, avoiding a salad of judgment for the comfort of your own modestly lit living room, with the company of a good book and no need for an elegant dining napkin. Reading is a rare pleasure and often a dangerous endeavour. Classics by the likes of Dickens are all the rage, but beware of springing your own sad story on unsuspecting friends. After all, some readers might take solace in discussing their mutual hatred for the latest author they deem too popular. In the Victorian era, a book isn't just a beloved pastime. It's a platform for debate, high society gossip, and even the risk of being labelled a literary heretic. So, consider yourself warned. To pick up a book in these parts is to step into a whirlwind of social conundrums. Picture yourself nestled in an ornate armchair, wearing the latest in silk fashions, a crowning feat of fashion that could either impress or suffocate you into submission. You imagine reclaiming some peace and quiet with a new novel, only to realise that choosing the wrong one might be as disastrous as mistaking arsenic for confectioner's sugar. Yes, dear reader, Victorian tastes run more toward the gloomy and introspective than modern popcorn thrillers. We're talking tales of woe, societal downfall, and moral decay. Fun, right? Imagine heading out to the local bookstore, a dimly lit establishment smelling vaguely of mothballs mixed with high-minded ideals. You may bump into the ever-judging Miss Penelope, the town's self-appointed literary police, who's been known to raise an eyebrow so high it practically grazes the ceiling. What to do if you dare choose a novel branded as sordid? The very thought of Penelope clucking her tongue could send shivers down your spine. How dare you enjoy a book that tackles the struggles of the lower classes, or, heaven forbid, addresses the complexities of love and loss? You might as well tattoo "I'm a sinner" across your forehead. Navigating the world of Victorian literature is therefore a constant game of high-stakes poker. Should you remain devoted to the classics, the literary equivalent of eating your broccoli, or do you dare venture into the bold new realm of scandalous novels? What's more, if you find yourself caught reading a novel deemed too risque, like anything from the likes of the controversial George Eliot, you might as well be wearing a sandwich board advertising your moral failings. In this world, fiction serves dual purposes as an escape from dreary reality and a magnifying glass for social issues disguised cleverly beneath the plot. Your friend Gertrude, for instance, is deep into The Tenant of Wildfell Hall. While the book allows her to relish in tales of a woman bravely defying the shackles of societal confines, you can be sure she'll spend the next tea party lecturing you on the horrors of marital confinement. How quaint of her. Of course, it doesn't end there. Having finished one book opens the door to earnest discussions, where coffee spills and vapid gossip intertwine with varied opinions on the latest flick. It's entirely possible that you'll be forced into a round robin, debate over the merits and misfires of literature with fellow bookworms, each attempting to outwit the other with profound quotes and pointed musings. Before you know it, your casual read becomes a courtroom drama with you on trial, alleged crimes, simply having a favourite character. Then there's the literary genre of shared misery, in which fictional characters experience some form of woe that could rival the Grim Reaper on his worst day. This brings a whole new level of camaraderie to the reading group. You're all suffering together over the uncertainties of life within the pages. Each twist serves as a metaphor for the existential dread you hide behind a rosy facade in polite society. Try explaining why you cried over a particularly tragic death scene during your tea session, without the potential for eye rolls or long, oh so very long, drawn-out sighs. And if you fancy trying your hand at writing, prepare to wade through a quagmire of unsolicited critique. Your well-intentioned masterpiece could be subject to scrutiny in a heartbeat. Dear friend, I appreciate your effort, but have you considered a more socially acceptable storyline featuring kittens and rainbows instead of that morose commentary on the fragility of human existence? Cue applause from the crowd when anyone suggests a safer subject matter. Ultimately, the Victorians turned literature into an art form both cherished and reviled. A high-wire act with social consequences so dire that a misplaced book title could ruin your reputation. Sitting amongst your peers, blissfully unaware of the swirling tempest beneath the surface of your novel choice, you take another sip of your lukewarm tea and brace for the torrent of literary judgment that could come your way. So, as dusk settles and the shadows lengthen across your ornate wallpaper, be sure to clutch your story of woe tightly. It's your ticket to both validation and inevitable madness in this grand Victorian literary circus. Falling into Victorian public transportation is no simple task. It's less about getting from point A to point B, and more about surviving the horde of humanity, puddles of who knows what, and the lurking threat of random aristocrats trying to upend your personal bubble. Imagine yourself squeezed into a wooden carriage, crammed in like an overstuffed sausage next to someone whose personal hygiene could start its own health department investigation. The scent wafting through the air has hints of coal smoke, mixed with something you sincerely hope isn't spoiled cabbage. The early morning ride in a horse-drawn omnibus is about as delightful as being trapped inside a damp sponge. At least one that constantly creaks and groans with each bump in the road. Your fellow commuters, each having their own tales of despair, are busy jostling for the briefest sliver of elbow room while trying to hold on to their hats, because heaven forbid a lady's bonnets get knocked askew by an errant bump. You find yourself peering out the small window, hoping to catch a glance of something other than the unfortunate gentleman who decided that oversharing is proper etiquette while seated. As the vehicle rattles along, you can hear the conductor shouting, "Hold on to your hats, folks! It's a bumpy ride through the murky streets of London," which is basically Victorian code for you're about to get tossed around like a pirate ship at sea. Suddenly, in an event akin to an unwanted surprise visit from a long-lost cousin without an invitation, the omnibus slows, lurching to a halt. You get an ominous feeling as it appears something inside has finally reached its breaking point, and you're not entirely keen on determining exactly what that might be. First, a few wafts of musty air, then a distinct rattle like something violent is about to go down. Before you can brace yourself, the door swings open, allowing in a rush of fresh air that's about on par with the unfiltered aroma of the Thames on a hot day. "Next stop, the market," bellows the conductor, and you're half tempted to throw in a "thank you, Captain Obvious," but instead you schmooch and hold on for dear life as people begin to pour out like it's the last drop from a badly shaken lemonade. At any moment, someone might make eye contact with you, and we all know the Victorian social contract dictates that breaking eye contact will result in a conversation where you will be forced to compliment their dreadful hat or dishevelled cravat. Speak of the devil! A chap with the most questionable facial hair approaches, clearly intent on engaging you, or more concerning, possibly sweeping you into a passionate discourse about the price of coal on the stock market. You subtly angle your body toward the window, praying for a sudden gust of wind to carry you away. The moment you think you've dodged a bullet, thoughts of sweet escape begin to fade. Instead, a remarkably overconfident lady, bedecked in layers the size of a small country, decides now is the perfect time to plant herself next to you. Every time the carriage lurches, she brings with her an avalanche of fluff and fabric, threatening to swallow you whole. You may as well be riding with a school of fish, considering how much the outfit jiggles and sways. In this confined space, you start to wonder if this is merely an elaborate social experiment not on public relations or transportation, but on small talk and personal space etiquette. Soon, your stop arrives, but leaving is no simple task. You must devise a plan to disentangle yourself from the human knot without eliciting gasps of horror or accidentally stepping on the toes of a furious gentleman who might just challenge you to a duel over that slight. Jousting in the middle of a crowded street is not how you envisioned your evening rolling out, and somehow, the thought of being flat on your back under that very horse you fear is far worse than any outfit malfunction. At last, you tumble out onto the pavement, gasping for fresh air, feeling as though you've just emerged from the underbelly of a Victorian beast. Surviving a ride on the omnibus, you speedwalk away, determined that standing on the street corner, no matter how disgusting, is far more dignified than what just transpired. As you glance back, you can't help but shake your head at the circus that just unfolded behind you. This, my friends, is just a typical day in the life of a Victorian traveller, where the journey itself could leave you more befuddled than your destination ever could. Would you trade all this chaos for the comfort of your living room and a nice cup of tea? You better believe it, because nothing in the world could make that bumpy ride worth the shenanigans that come with it. But alas, what would the Victorians know about leisurely travel? All they cared about was arriving, regardless of the perils involved. And you find yourself thanking your lucky stars for the mere existence of modern transportation, even if it does come with its own set of unfortunate smells. In the Victorian era, children are sources of both joy and despair, often held to impossible standards. You're almost guaranteed to see a child with either a snotty nose or grinning from ear to ear after taste testing something suspicious. Raising a family is akin to training for a marathon, only much less rewarding and with more crying. Welcome to the chaotic world of Victorian childhood, where every parent is caught in a storm of societal expectations, maternal instinct, and the occasional bout of dysentery. Let's start with the birth process. No pleasant stroll in the park, mind you. Those labour pains are more dramatic than a Shakespearean tragedy. Entering the world as a Victorian child is akin to being launched from a cannon. There's a midwife, a room full of relatives, and the constant fear of maternal mortality hovering like a very real black cloud. After hours of grunting, pushing, and perhaps invoking a few choice curses aimed at the heavens, you emerge, yelling, slimy, and definitely confused about whether this is really the moment your life begins. As an infant, it's blissful ignorance. Your only responsibilities include consuming your weight in milk and securing a cosy spot in your mother's arms, preferably one that doesn't involve a bonnet. But wait, you're not just any Victorian baby. You're part of a grand experiment of parenting. Your mother, armed with the latest advice from Dr. So-and-so's guide to raising angelic offspring, has decided that starvation is the true path to enlightenment. You may think you're getting fed well, but surprise. Your porridge comes watered down to the point where you could probably call it Victorian broth instead. As you grow and start exploring the world, add in the delightful challenge of Victorian toys. Mind you, these aren't the well-engineered, brightly coloured wonders like today's entertainment. No, your toys are either carved from questionable materials or, even better, made of metal that's gleefully rusting away. Congratulations, you just got your hands on a very sharp toy sword that, unbeknownst to you, was last played within a small boy's death penalty act, with rusty edges that screamed tetanus. Your parents thought it was charming, but fear not, your friends will likely be just as injured. The local park is less about lush green fields and more about dodging small hills made of broken glass, brambles, and the odd stray goat. Look out! Don't get your pretty dress caught in the thorn bushes, your mother warns dramatically, because nothing is more Victorian than worrying about childhood injuries while pretending your corset isn't compressing your lungs. Now let's discuss education, shall we? Attending school isn't exactly a walk through the tulips either. Imagine being crammed into a room with swarms of sadistic children, sorry, I meant classmates, while a weary, washed-up teacher glowers at you as if you just stepped on their last cookie. You sit on splintering wooden benches, peering at ancient texts written in Latin which, let's be honest, you couldn't give two hoots about. Half the time, you're wondering if that old tome might have contained some mysterious curse passed down through generations. The only thing you're truly learning is how to survive an afternoon without getting your hair pulled or being tacked with the dreaded ruler, a technique you'll carry into adulthood. And let's not skip over the idea of playdates, a classic Victorian tradition. Nothing quite like inviting your neighbour's disease-ridden children over to share your toys, and possibly a few germs that will take out half your household come winter. Your mother considers it beneficial for your development. After all, no good can come from growing up isolated. The irony, of course, is that beneficial often translates to having one child ask if your dad's a chimney sweep, while reciprocating with a belly full of homemade broth that offers less nutrition than a handful of dirt. But eventually, as you wade through the muck of Victorian childhood, there is light at the end of the tunnel, adolescence. Picture this, the ghastly transformation where you transition from misadventures in dressings to inevitable quests for societal validation. You step forth with layers of clothing that would make a Michelin man blush, navigating the perilous landscape of teenage drama without the slightest dose of vitamin D, for heaven forbid you're seen lounging in the sun. There's heartache to navigate, romances to fester, and let's not forget the looming spectre of your parents' judgment. Good luck trying to date while you're both wearing enough fabric to make a tent. Victorian child-rearing may seem like an exercise in folly, but somehow you survive. You reach adulthood, probably in one piece, albeit a jumble of neuroses, and you've made it through a gauntlet of snot, rust, and reproach. Looking back, who knows if you'll end up being the joyful parent or using scolding as a primary parenting tool? Such is the riddle of Victorianism, where every misstep is merely a prelude to the next generation's study in strange family dynamics. So here's to you, the survivors of Victorian parenthood, for not just persevering, but laughing in the face of chaos. Medicine, where a cure is often a front-row ticket to your own funeral. Home remedies and dubious potions abound, but nothing quite compares to the thrill of a nice bloodletting session performed by your local barber surgeon. Don't sweat it. At least he has a nice set of blades. You can just picture it. A true Renaissance man, this barber surgeon. Halfway through a haircut, he pauses to bleed you dry, all while explaining the latest scandal involving Lady Whatchamacallit and her clawfoot bathtub. Imagine lying on his rickety table, surrounded by the sweet scent of disinfectants that vaguely resemble a horse stable, and not a clean one at that. Blood spilling onto the floor is an accepted occurrence, reaffirming that the medical field is far more chaotic than your last dinner party. You've just got to hope he steers clear of that bloody rash you've been trying to ignore. However, every time you hear that reassuring snip snip, you wonder if he's about to unveil the next horrid trend in self-care. If you thought bloodletting was a relic of the past, think again. It's practically a popular pastime in Victorian England. Who needs pesky science when you can just restore balance to your humours, which are, of course, not at all questionable in origin? So, you sit back while he drains the bad blood from you, despite the fact that you're starting to feel a little woozy. Is it the blood-depriving dizziness, or is it the charming tales of bowel movements from the previous patient? It's a real toss-up. And let's not forget the delightful concoctions they whip up in an effort to cure everything from a slight cough to a severe case of getting hit by a runaway horse. You might find yourself sipping on a potion brewed with just the right amount of earthworms, mercury, and a sprinkle of fun. In the Victorian world, natural ingredients mean something quite different than what your herbalist might suggest today. Did I mention the popularity of opium? That's right. Your typical Victorian knew the benefits of a little dose of the good stuff to ease the pain of existence, a cure for everything, including the Victorian blues that stem from ghastly fashion choices. Consider the wild array of treatments offered in the form of pills, powders and potions. Have a headache? Why not down some ground-up toads and a splash of wine? It's not insanity, it's just the way things were done back then. You could also opt for the classic amber beads, frequented by mothers who swore these quaint necklaces would soothe teething pain. Forget science. It's popular opinion or nothing. Who needs proper medical journals when you have the local gossip keen to endorse the latest trends? If it worked for Agnes, it will work for you. Then there's the phenomenon of the secret remedy. You know, those potions sold by the enigmatic old ladies, who probably have a broomstick hidden under the quilt. They mix questionable ingredients, including things that just might be poisonous. But who cares? You're not just looking for healing, you're hunting down the whispers of enchantment. As the old saying goes, if it doesn't leave you feeling a little uneasy, did it even work? As the day winds down and your body is feeling less than stellar, the headache begins to settle in for a long stay. Don't even think about calling a doctor. They might just suggest more leeches. Yes, leeches. Those little critters are the darlings of the medical world right now, revered for their ability to suck out excess blood and, according to some, good fortune. Because honestly, what's a little parasite-infested nuisance in comparison to a night of persistent pain? And let's not paint the entire foundation of medicine with a bleak brush. Victorian inventions such as the stethoscope are around as a sign of progress, often leaving you to wonder why you can't just call it a pulse listener. Still feeling awfully unwell? Well, grab a beer. Seems absurd, but honestly it's the best option for dehydration in a world where even water is questionable. So, when you settle into bed tonight, clutching your new herbal station, just be grateful you're not locked in an era with potions more suspicious than your neighbour's cat. Because as the saying goes, whoever thought medicine could be so entertaining never had to face the sceptical eye of a barber surgeon or an angry horse. Let me know when you'd like to proceed with another segment. Gardening in this epoch is an exercise in bravery and possibly treason. Forget your hydrangeas and daisies. You're more likely to be growing questionable veggies. Best not mention those weeds. Your neighbours might be dying to know what better measures you've taken to deal with pests. Holding a spade feels less like wielding a tool of nature, and more like holding a sword in a battle theatre where every leaf might harbour a deadly virus. You step outside with a sense of foreboding, knowing that your journey into agriculture could easily lead to a conversation about the latest gossip, the kind that earns you a sidelong glance or worse, an invitation for tea where you'll be interrogated about your crops. You crouch low, examining your parsnips, which look suspiciously like something out of a horror film. The miracles of nature in the Victorian era often involve bending the rules of the natural world just a tad, which might explain why your beans are growing green and vibrant, but also sporting tiny boiling tumours. Were those intended, or did they sprout from the bit of manure you may or may not have forgotten to throw out back last week? In this world, it seems plausible that the local gossip reeked of bad tomatoes and whispered about your potential dissection of what exactly constitutes organic. Speaking of local gossip, have you heard that Lady Puddleton's tomatoes were the colour of a grubby shoelace? Not only did she use ancient compost, but it's rumoured she's been using the remnants from that pet rabbit instead of proper fertiliser. The last thing you need is townspeople connecting you with Lady Puddleton's agricultural nightmares. A completely drawn-out affair could lead to whispers of witchcraft, and before you know it, you'll be the centre of attention during a spontaneous town meeting where someone accidentally proposes a steak to roast marshmallows over. Time to worry about your beloved cabbage patch, the perfect target for cabbage whites who seem to view your greens as an all-you-can-eat buffet. You could try something bold, like slathering them with a mixture of soap and water, an age-old recipe passed down through generations that suspiciously resembles a witchy concoction more than a welcome neighbourly gesture. As you struggle to fend off these pests with the delicate precision typically reserved for disarming a bomb, you wonder if you've stumbled into a subplot of botanical espionage. After all, if your crop fails, you might just have to start bartering for vegetables with your neighbour. And who knows what secrets might come crawling across the fence. Well, it's time to engage in a true battle of wits, one that's as much about maintaining appearances as it is about growing vegetables. You've just stumbled onto Lady Greenthum's gardening strategies, your arch-nemesis in the community garden. She has absolutely perfected presenting her vegetables as though they came straight from the pages of a horticultural magazine, even while knowing that her zucchini are just as likely to be filled with worms as yours. Off in the corner, she proudly holds forth about the secret origins of her heirloom seeds, unintentionally revealing you, without a shred of envy, how inept you must appear by comparison. In these moments of shared earthiness and dirt under nails, every casual garden encounter is fraught with potential backstabbing and secret gardening societies, where everyone gathers under the cover of night to cultivate chemically altered hybrids. Who's to say an innocent garden plot won't soon transform into something resembling a clandestine espionage battle, where every weed might contain a hidden meaning, and each vegetable might be a plot to steal away the title of best gardener in the village. As the sun begins to fade, the plant life around you starts to look less like vibrant produce and more like a haunted Halloween display. You have a nagging feeling that the daisies you didn't plant are now sprouting like weeds in your thoughts. Yes, even the flowers are mocking you from the neighbouring patch. And just to make your gardening journey more rewarding, read challenging, the local rabbits decide to make your garden their personal buffet, nibbling merrily on everything you fought to grow. So you return home, empty-handed and watering your plants with half-hearted hopes, shutting the door behind you, thankful they weren't entirely destroyed. Tomorrow is a new day, which means another round among the green embarrassment you've dubbed your garden. But hey, at least you didn't end up accused of treason just yet. After all, with each layer of mulch you lay, you're one step closer to membership in the cult of unconventional gardening. A tale to tell, perhaps, over tea with friends or foes. Inside the home, we're drenched in domesticity, surrounded by crumbling wallpaper and multiple layers of dust. Navigating the social landscape on your cosy couch isn't easy when interruptions come from a chorus of nagging household chores and the lingering possibility of scandal just outside. Picture it, a cheerful Victorian home brimming with children, pets, and the dismay of a domestic disaster waiting to happen. Dust bunnies tumble underfoot like they're auditioning for a horror film, while the creaky floorboards report every footfall like an overzealous gossip. But let's not forget the unbearable excitement of housework, which feels less like a chore and more like a classified mission for social survival. Are you ready to tackle laundry? Get your finest bucket and plunge it into the water tub. Of course, this tub isn't filled with the nice hot water you're dreaming about. No, it's a chilly concoction of dishwater mixed with a hint of yesterday's mystery stew, only adding a dash of despair to an already grim reality. Washing laundry must be done with the skill of an acrobat, traversing the tension and tight ropes of laundry lines that might snap at any moment. You know you're living life on the edge when your delicate linens are flapping in the wind while you secretly pray they don't fall flat into the neighbour's yard, preferably missing the garden gnome that wishes it had a better view. And what's that smell wafting through the air? Is it the roast chicken you will definitely forget to take out of the oven, or perhaps the remnants from last night's boiled cabbage that are still haunting the kitchen? Cooking in Victorian times operates under the assumption that the more unfortunate the dish, the more it brings friends to gather round and discuss, which is code for critiquing your culinary choices while also judging your questionable inclination toward cottage pie. Now, while you're busy perfecting your culinary techniques, or at least trying not to set something ablaze, the children whirl around you like a tornado of sticky fingers and unsolved mysteries. Ever tried to keep track of their whereabouts while simultaneously juggling a pot of gruel? One moment, little Eloise is playing hide-and-seek in the parlour, and the next moment, she's fueling a miniature revolution with a newfound ability to climb the drapes and conquer the world, one crinoline at a time. And speaking of revolutions, let's not ignore the visitors. In the Victorian era, social engagements resemble a game of chess, where every move counts and the stakes are ridiculously high. Strategy is paramount. You hope your great-aunt Eloise doesn't show up. Her penchant for gossip is notorious. It's like she's wielding a gossip scroll, ready to inscribe your laundry habits alongside your neighbours, who may or may not be harbouring a secret scandal regarding tea room etiquette. The thought of being the next hot topic at the tea party should send shivers down your spine, or at least prompt you to check the status of your current trousers, which may now house remnants of the neighbour's cat. As evening approaches, the household transforms for the post-work ritual, the dinner party. Nothing in the world strikes terror into the hearts of a Victorian woman quite like preparing for guests. Each meal must be presented with the finesse of a royal banquet, despite the meal only consisting of questionable meat and soggy vegetables. Each clink and clatter of utensils echoes like a symphony orchestra, tuning up before a performance, except the only audience members are family members who are praying for something edible, and hoping you don't serve them something they've dubbed charming yet indigestible. Just when you think you can settle into a comfortable evening with candles flickering gently, the various members of your household begin to escalate into melodrama, as if they're rehearsing for Shakespeare. You've got your husband declaring he's insufferably tired, grandma on a tirade about the fleeting nature of gumdrops, and your child transforming into a thespian over a missing napkin. Who knew dinner preparation would lead to a household hoedown featuring a cast of characters larger than life, all vying for the lead role? So, welcome to the Victorian domestic stage, a place where mundane tasks are amplified into a grand opera of chaos, and every household chore can turn into a high-stakes drama. The key? Keep the kettle boiling, the gnomes quiet, and pray that by the end of the day you still have your wits about you, or at least a stiff drink, a warm bath, and the hope that tomorrow will require far fewer domestic theatrics. On the bright side, at least the Victorians prided themselves on charity work. But tread carefully. One wrong move could make you a pariah. Should you really care about the condition of the poor, or is it just about polishing your social standing as you toss a coin their way? The moral code of the time was like wearing a corset, tight, restrictive, and prone to causing discomfort. It's a delicate dance you engage in every day on the bustling streets of London, where the sights of beggars and the cries of unfortunate souls can make even the most indifferent passerby feel a twinge of guilt. But feeling is one thing, acting on it is another. Imagine you're strolling through the city, wrapped in layers of fine wool because comfort is an abstract concept, and you encounter a sad-looking man with a forlorn expression and a hat whose holes are almost as impressive as his storytelling skills. There he stands, a living embodiment of Victorian misfortune, the kind that smothers your conscience with guilt so thick you could almost sculpt it. You know that if you walk by with a haughty nose in the air, you risk the grim spectre of being labelled selfish. God forbid the lady down the lane notices you ignoring a heartfelt struggle. She'll make sure your name shines as brightly as her tarnished silverware. Offering him a coin seems like the least you can do. It's a perfectly measured act of charity, good for your conscience and even better for your reputation. You reach into your pocket with the confidence of a retired theatre star and pull out a shiny penny, extending it with as much flair as if you were handing out invitations to a royal ball. But the moment it leaves your hand, you realise you've fallen into the paradox of Victorian charity. You want to help, but you also want to look good while doing it. You risk pitying him too much, and suddenly everyone thinks you're planning to adopt him. Hooray! Another benefactor of the working class. You can hear the whispers. Back at home, you can imagine your friends clinking glasses while gossiping. Ah, dear Clara, the gracious donor. All the while she's adding to her collection of ornamental plates. They'll say with laughter so sweet it almost smells like baked goods. If only baked goods were anything other than a rare find in this century. Charity is a performing art, folks, and everyone has a front row seat. And let's not kid ourselves. It's not just about warm feelings and social currency. No, there's a systematic oddity about Victorian charity that feels like serving soup from a pot that's been brewing for weeks, a bit questionable but still somehow delicious. Institutions like the Society for the Relief of Distressed Gentlewomen and the Charity Organisation Society may emerge with goals that echo through the brick-walled alleyways like a cheerful ghost, but turns out the method by which they aim to help is as muddled as the soup itself. Is it truly charitable to throw a shilling at a poor working-class man only to whisk him into a line where perfectly good bread sits uneaten by charities that often see donors as revered figures instead of actual people in need? More often than not, charity means sending the impoverished to the closest benevolence office equipped for your next shopping trip in kindness. Help thou, but only under our conditions, they call. Caution becomes a beloved friend in this world of shared misery. Charity forms a fascinating twist, a great idea entwined with a knot of hypocrisies. Social reformers, brimming with ideas of altruism and morality, have imminent plans that sound lovely, but when faced with reality, they inevitably crash as hard as a prom queen's hopes against reality. Their great dreams for uplifting the working class seem to crumble like a pancake under their overly wealthy boots. Yet beneath this veneer of hypocrisy, the urgent cries for compassion suggest that genuine care does exist amid the charade. Some truly compassionate souls venture out into the streets and dive into the muck and mire of society, hoping they find a way out without losing an arm in the process. And while they're judged by pigeonholers who calculate each donation against their yearly earnings, these brave souls embody the Victorian spark necessary for any societal shift. So, dear listener, the reality of charity in the Victorian age is twofold. It's a performance art and a necessary evil. You might find yourself inadvertent members of the aristocratic circus, teetering between genuine compassion and structured hypocrisy, all in the pursuit of keeping a clean conscience while navigating cobblestones filled with both the downtrodden and footprints laced with pride. Just remember, when the environment you inhabit feels like theatre while holding your heart in the balance, all you can do is tread lightly, even if it's in a pair of impossible shoes. Death in Victorian England is treated less like a burden and more like an unwanted guest who shows up without an invitation. Funerals are societal events where everyone tries to outsob one another over the casket. The only mistake would be gifting a corpse your bread instead of flowers. You can hear the creaking floorboards of the parlour as friends and family shuffle in, each draped in a mourning attire, as if they coordinated based on how grotesquely they could mismatch their grief. It's the equivalent of a sobbing fashion show. "Oh, I see you brought the widow's veil. Well, I'm wearing black crepe from head to toe, and this frock is so tattered it practically screams misery." Once the coffin is in the room, the real competition begins. Everyone adjusts their hats, eyes shimmering with faux life, and launches into a chorus of lamentations. "He was so beloved," someone declares, barely holding it together. Meanwhile, a neighbour eyes that half-eaten tea cake left unattended on an overly ornate table. Because let's be honest, in the Victorian era, saving face during grief was just as crucial as saving the leftover pastries. Who wouldn't want to scoop some off a semi-mourning family's table before their tears fully flowed? And goodness, the snacks! It's a sombre affair, balancing spiteful biting sobs and awkward munching. As attendees furrow their brows out of respect, they also contemplate the sandwiches meticulously prepared with the same amount of love as a medieval peasant preparing a hog for slaughter. Everything is flavourless, not unlike the conversations swirling about the deceased. "Oh, I remember when he had that one tooth," one person dramatically quips. Yes, amazing how toothless men somehow manage to make such a big impact on our lives, someone else replies dryly while chewing a stale biscuit. But the absurdities don't end at the parlour, oh no. The funeral procession, the grand finale of the morbid spectacle, is an event similar to a parade with low expectations. Everyone flocks behind the ornate horse-drawn carriage like some macabre, weeping train of sorrow. We're talking hats and feathers resembling those of a garden gone wild, and as with every public display in Victorian life, the challenge of keeping your composure while still looking fabulous is paramount. Each sob must be carefully calculated, perhaps even timed, so it comes at the perfect moment as the carriage creeps past onlookers. Think of it as a slow dance with grief, a meticulously choreographed waltz of despair. If your performance doesn't elicit gasps, was it even really a proper funeral? If you weren't on the guest list, don't even think of showing up, and don't dare ask about the cause of death. That quizzical question is an equivalent to bringing donuts to a health retreat. Just when you think the atmosphere can't get more morose, the clumsiness of Victorian medicine rises to the occasion. He must have had such a strong constitution, one particularly oblivious guest offers, blissfully unaware that the dearly departed was probably a victim of none other than a simple sneeze gone awry, also known as the Great Extermination Age. Speaking of exhuming conversations, once the body's laid to rest, that doesn't mean the spectacle stops. Oh no, dear listener, the after-party of the deceased's life follows. Coffin parties, yes, they're a thing, are filled with drinks strong enough to serve as both anaesthesia and blind courage. In these sombre gatherings, guests drown their guilt in spirits that have been distilled with the same carelessness as the deceased lived their life. Rumour has it that conversations can escalate quickly, spiralling from poor Mr. Murdoch's unfortunate passing to, "I hear Aunt Geraldine has an interesting rash," in less than 3 minutes. And let's not forget about the lively discussions about what happens after death. Ever heard of a funeral cake? At these events, folks often convince themselves that just because someone has gone to the great beyond doesn't mean their fault should remain unexamined. With each slice of pie, someone will redefine celebration of life by reconnecting with that one family member none of them can bear to see at family gatherings. As you drift off into slumber, consider waking up in this life of absurdity, where death is a weekly affair, dressed in heavy fabrics and lavish hats, with all the pomp and circumstance that would leave even a ghost rolling its eyes in disbelief. So, when you close your eyes tonight, just remember your modern conveniences, cozy beds, warm blankets, and indoor plumbing. Because while funerals in the Victorian era may have been an artistic performance of human emotion, the rest of us can simply nod off rather than contemplate our mortality over stale scones. Religion is everywhere, and if you miss church, the doom and gloom will loom over your head like a misty rain cloud. Sunday sermons blend seamlessly into every facet of life, drowning out any real thoughts you've been having about that mysterious rash on your arm. You'd better believe gossip spreads like wildfire if you dare to miss the morning service. The local priest might just assume you're planning to become an eccentric hermit who fears the light of God, and possibly the doctor. So, what's a Victorian to do? You strategically plan one of those sudden illnesses that keeps you from having to sit in the pews for 2 hours while someone yells biblical passages at your discomfort. As with any good Victorian hard-working citizen, the week begins with a hearty hallelujah, or for many a for goodness sake do we have to. Sunday marks the climax of an exasperating cycle of religious observation, where the entire community races to style their best hats and frocks, because nothing says virtuous soul like a hat that defies the laws of gravity and common sense. You trudge down to the churchyard, dodging muddy puddles like a contestant in an ungodly obstacle course, praying you don't accidentally land in a cowpat before entering God's house. Once there, the whole spectacle begins. The congregation gathers like a swarm of dishevelled bees, buzzing with gossip, hope, and the occasional squawking child searching for crumbs. The renowned preacher, a man with a beard that looks like it has taken up residence on its own, stands proudly at the pulpit. His voice booms like God sending an errant thundercloud to rain on your hay fever. He sweeps through scripture with an intensity that reveals more about his questionable personal life than any biblical topic. And if that sermon starts getting too personal, warning you about the eternal fires of hell for some supposedly minor infraction, good luck keeping a straight face while fidgeting in your ridiculously tight corset. And let's not forget about the offertory part of the service. The moment you're supposed to dig deep into your pocket to support the church's latest scandal. Renovation project. It's one of those awkward moments where you find yourself wondering if your pocket change might finally help patch those walls that look like they could crumble at any moment, or if that money's going straight into Father Grimble's new candlestick fund. Everyone watches expectantly, assessing whether you put in the necessary amount to be deemed worthy in their eyes. Talk about pressure. After what seems like an eternity of church hymns, ridiculously lengthy prayers, and a sermon that couldn't possibly apply more to your neighbour than to you, the service finally wraps up. As the congregation pours out like a waterfall of dormant anxieties, you realise you've committed another social faux pas, failing to have the talk with the unfortunate soul next to you about that rash. Or perhaps you should just stick to safe topics like the weather. Because who needs to bother with discussing how to cure a body of sins when you can just drown yourself in the sweet scent of freshly baked bread? The charming part of this whole scenario is that even after a 2-hour sermon, the anxiety doesn't vanish. There are always prayers of intercession waiting on your shoulders, as the stained glass images of saints glare down upon your doubts like devoted spectators at a gladiatorial match. Inside, you can already hear them whispering about your hidden flaws, and it's only just hitting you. Spending the night before guessing which soup won the accompanying potluck could be the real sin here, a sin of untold culinary heights. After all this weekly rigmarole, you might wonder how any Victorian soul might find a moment of peace. Forget mental health. It's more about ensuring your spiritual card is stamped every Sunday. The church might instill values, but being surrounded by neighbours who carefully calculate your eternal fate creates an undue spotlight. One wrong glance, a misrepresented hymn choice, and suddenly you're off the guest list for the next tea party. So, as you compare your Sunday best to Mrs. Pendleton's feathers, head down from the church with an entire week of morality hanging over your head like a storm cloud. You might think of giving your local priest an earful about that time you did try purging your sins for the sake of some good gossip. At least next Sunday might just be a little less cramped, right? Or maybe you'll find yourself back in those pews, pondering the same old penalties for infractions that could potentially have only existed in your own head. Either way, it's the Victorian way, drowning amidst the divine while wishing for the blissful relief of not having to pray over your dinner. The Victorian age had a distinct smell, thanks to the combination of coal smoke, wet wool, and an unhealthy dose of body odour. The etiquette of social gatherings does not take personal hygiene into account, so prepare yourself for the olfactory equivalent of a slap across the face. Imagine stepping into a grand drawing room, only to be immediately assaulted by the musty aroma of too many unwashed bodies, jammed together like sardines in a tin can. It's a curious blend that might remind you of a damp basement mixed with a long-forgotten sock hidden underneath an old piano. As you weave through this cloud of smells, there's also the lingering scent of whatever meat was served at dinner, probably something mysterious and dubious, like mystery stew or livestock that might have seen better days. The Victorians loved their meat dishes, smothered in rich sauces and garnished with whatever greens hadn't yet turned to compost. But don't think about the food too much. You might want to focus on trying not to inhale too deeply, unless you're secretly a fan of the aroma of regret and questionable culinary choices. And oh, don't forget the reek of the street. The very streets are essentially a potpourri of horse droppings, ash, and less than savoury offal. Get too close to a well-travelled road, and you might get a whiff of a particularly adventurous blend of mud, hay, and whatever your neighbour's pig decided to have for dinner. The idea of freshening up before heading to an event is a naive fantasy, as running water is a privileged luxury, and soap is more akin to a fairy tale than a cleaning product. You might find yourself wondering, how did they mingle? How did anyone remain polite in such an assault on the senses? Except, of course, for dear Lady Thornton, whose grieved sense of odour seems less discerning than her sense of social propriety. She's the one fluttering about, offering airs and graces while pretending she can smell the lavender in her handkerchief, instead of the cabbage soup lingering in a nearby corner. The facade of good breeding seems only to heighten the irony. Is there a point to all this pretense if everyone is gagging under a shared cloud of stink? As you navigate this chaotic sensory experience, you might stumble into a game of polite conversation where no one mentions the smell. Instead, the topics of discussion are far more civilized, like the weather or the latest scandal about the Duke who was seen leaving the tavern before the crack of dawn with someone who definitely isn't his wife. You're caught in the odd juxtaposition between the rising gossip temperature and the uncomfortable odours that curl your toes. It's a world where the surface seems painted in graceful poise and kind nods, while beneath, everyone seems to know they are simply victims trapped in a nasal purgatory. The irony doesn't stop there. Despite the stench that wafts through the air, it seems the Victorian elite were obsessed with appearances and invested heavily in perfume. Yes, let's mask the underlying foulness with floral sprays that might as well be chemical warfare. You've got roses, violets, and the occasional splash of something that could be mothballs. The result? A delightful layer of floral horror that swirls with the ground-level muck to create a sensory cocktail that should be bottled as a horror film prop. Never fear, for a good dose of pine-scented deodorant eliminates all those pesky pheromones and just sends them into the oblivion of olfactory chaos. By the time you make your exit, you'll step into the fresh air, your lungs yearning for cleaner pastures, desperately seeking relief from this fetid social engagement. It's a victory, right? Until you remember, you'll likely return next week for another evening of enjoyable misery. And therein lies the true art of Victorian society, learning to embrace the chaos, the contradictions, and yes, the scents. A harmonious blend of foul territory and charming conversation. If, after all that, you're still not ready to retch, congratulations. You've just been unofficially ordained into the society of the absurd. Here's to smelling like mediocrity during your next soiree, and to raising a toast to the chaos of human connection, one whiff at a time. Birthdays and anniversaries are hardly the joyous events you would think. Celebrate them in private, or risk gossip spreading to every corner of the neighbourhood. Events resemble cautionary tales more than celebrations, particularly if Lady Puddleton finds a way to ruin the soiree. In the Victorian era, a low-key birthday party often spiralled into an elaborate affair of confusion and faux pas. Imagine this. Aunt Agatha shows up 5 minutes late sporting a hat the size of a small pony, while Uncle Henry reads the room as well as a poorly written novel. Just when you thought it would be a quaint gathering, chaos ensues. The cake, a supposed highlight, arrives only to reveal its 100 layers of questionable flavours, a true feat of culinary courage. There's the classic "what the heck is this" moment as guests contemplate whether you've actually served them something resembling bat guano with royal icing. Ever heard of icing on the cake? It was the Victorian way to symbolise that sometimes life's disasters come with sprinkles. So you stand there, cake knife in hand, debating whether to serve the thing or just hide it under the table. Because who needs social prestige when you have a potential health hazard on display? And let's not forget the gifts, or should we say, the delightful potential for social disaster. Bringing a gift is mandatory, and of course, it has to outshine what the last person brought. This unspoken rule escalates the tension higher than your great-aunt's voice when someone mistakenly compliments her doppelganger hairstyle of yesterday's mangle. Everyone's fervently debating whether your third cousin's wool socks are a charming hand-knit token of affection or an elaborate insult that communicates you should buy the person another gift this Thursday. With Aunt Agatha eyeing Uncle Henry, who's now juggling rotten vegetables in what might be a new party game gone wrong, you can feel the atmosphere shift. The mood has become an uncomfortable cocktail of forced laughter and whispers. Remember, in a world where gossip is the bloodline of social standing, anything less than perfection is downright scandalous. Each cake slice you serve carries the weight of potential rumours about your culinary lack of finesse. Did you hear Melanie's cake tasted more like despair than chocolate? I hear rumour has it her husband is seeking scandalous alternatives for next year's buttercream. You can practically see the tongues wagging as your once intimate celebration morphs into a lively and public critique. And then there's the drinking. Oh, the drinking. While some may think a quiet sip of sherry is a good idea, remember, Victorian gatherings come with a healthy amount of port, followed by some dreadful concoction they call punch. Guests get more than merry. They transform into overzealous philosophers engaged in meaningful discussions about topics no one cares about, such as best, practices for pruning roses, or debates about the merits of chimney sweeping as a dignified profession. Meanwhile, in the corner, someone is confusing the punch bowl with a punch-up, inadvertently inspiring visions of absolute absurdity. As the night wears on, you glance at the clock wishing for a time travel device. To your left, a lively debate erupts over the etiquette of inviting the neighbour's dog to dinner, which, let me remind you, can become a hot topic in an all-feline household. And on your right, a toddler is throwing an epic tantrum over getting too much attention. A typical Victorian child clearly trained on how to create a scene. You realise that to celebrate is fine, but continually plotting your escape from this extraordinary mess has become an act of triumph worthy of its own Shakespearean tragedy. And what about the final call to action, the heartfelt toasts? Oh, those heartfelt toasts! A well-intentioned tribute can easily veer into a 10-minute monologue about all of your perceived failures and misadventures. At this point, you might wish you had just stayed under the covers for the day, but alas, you're at the mercy of the gathered souls, who are probably wondering if the local preacher has finally recovered from Lady Puddleton's last evening out. All the while, you're reflecting that getting older should be a delightful affair, filled with laughter, not a regret-laden game of social roulette, where the only prize is your dwindling sanity. So, as the evening winds down and guests stumble home, clutching their newly acquired gossip like it's the latest scandalous newspaper, you escape into your quiet corner. There you dream of future birthdays, perhaps involving a teddy bear picnic in the garden, no Lady Puddleton allowed. You might even entertain thoughts of skipping the entire thing entirely and repairing the relationship with your own bed and a mountain of dessert. Because, let's be honest, nothing screams happy birthday quite like embracing the solitary joys of life, where there's no cake to choke on and no Aunt Agatha to embarrass you for the next decade. Ah, the sweet relief of a world free from those absurd societal expectations, a true gift indeed. The age of invention. What a wonderful time to be alive, and how great it is to have a rickety contraption designed to solve every problem. Flimsy machines may succeed in humiliating their inventors, all while society wonders if this whole progress thing was actually worth the effort. The Victorians, self-proclaimed champions of innovation, lived in a whirlwind of newfangled gadgets that were supposed to make life easier, but mostly made it a tad more adventurous. From the steam engine that promised to whisk you away at a staggering speed of 5 miles an hour to the awkwardly giant sewing machines that could somehow still sew your fingers to your brilliant dress. It was an era teetering perilously on the edge of ingenuity and absurdity. Now, imagine yourself in a typical Victorian household, surrounded by the clatter of new technology that only seems to operate when it feels like it. Your morning coffee, for example, depends on a new contraption called the coffee percolator, which looks suspiciously more like a medieval torture device than a kitchen appliance. Watching it sputter and spit, you wonder if it's brewing a delicious cup of joe or attempting to summon some evil spirit from the depths of 1845. The kitchen is a battleground of inventions where a truly restless soul can get stuck experimenting with egg boilers that may or may not explode, a toaster that requires a neighbourhood watch just to use, and the ever-hazardous potato peeling machine, which probably has a higher casualty rate than any battle fought on the front lines. And speaking of battles, the flushed excitement of progression came with the flaring tempers of everyone involved. You could stroll down the street and hit a bumpy cobblestone as a great new steam-powered carriage rattles past, causing a cloud of soot to rise like dove at a funeral. The driver, having achieved about half of the desired speed and a quarter of the desired grace, yells at the pedestrians to get out of the way. But a logical question arises: was it really progress if it only created more dangers? It's like gifting a toddler a can of soda, and then wondering why they're bouncing off the walls like an unhinged kangaroo. Later, the evening's entertainment often included demonstrations of the latest and greatest labour-saving devices. You invite Mr. Fiddlesticks, the local inventor, who insists he's come up with something that will change everything. Eyes wide with hope, the crowd gathers in your living room, only to watch as he unveils a contraption that blends, chops, and even sings. Unfortunately, the singing soup maker only manages to butcher a piece of Beethoven's Fifth, but does perform a splendid act of flinging soup everywhere, leaving your fine china in a state of disaster. Mr. Fiddlesticks, undeterred, makes a valiant effort to continue presenting his ideas, but the audience is now torn between their laughter and the choice of either silencing him or adopting a rolling pin as self-defense. This relentless quest for progress meant that people sometimes lost all semblance of sanity. Take, for example, the new medication made from questionable ingredients that were all the rage at your local pharmacy. A cough syrup concocted with opium and a touch of arsenic was sold to soothe symptoms, which ironically led to people showing up for their cough and leaving with a smile resembling someone who'd just wrapped up time with the hallucinogenic devil himself. The truth is that the Victorians had a vendetta against discomfort. In their ongoing struggle to eliminate even the slightest inconvenience, the invention of the wheelchair instead became known as a bath chair. Yes, the bath chair was for those who wanted a convenient place to rest while their legs screamed for mercy in public, because bathing in circles was obviously the next step in civilization. Of course, we mustn't forget about the exploding inventions like the gas lamps that were supposed to illuminate the streets, but instead merely became a source for many a Victorian horror story. Every evening became a social event of dodging moving flames, while gaslit homes turned into surprising light-up houses in which many ended up as impromptu fire hazards. Who knew progress would come with a side of spontaneous combustion? In a world where every new invention never quite worked the way it was intended, the Great Victorian era was as much a period of delight as it was a profound exercise in collective panic. So, next time you find yourself struggling to assemble IKEA furniture, spare a thought for those brave souls who lived in an age of innovation, where every new gizmo could be a blessing or a day spent scrambling for the fire extinguisher. Now, let's lift our teacups to the glorious unpredictability of progress. May it continue to evolve without taking us all down with it. The pursuit of love feels like a grand play where everyone flirts like actors on a stage. Amid the societal expectations and scandalous affairs, relationships blossom in all the worst ways imaginable. The wrong pairings could prove to be about as romantic as sharing a bath with a goat. Choices are limited, with romantic overtures as cheery as a funeral march. Matchmaking boundaries are as strict as a corset, and love often arrives like a carriage at the wrong address. After all, if you've never flirted with a distant cousin or a coworker who thinks washing is overrated, are you even really Victorian? Now picture this. You've just received an invitation to an esteemed ball, the perfect setting for more backstabbing than a neighbourhood watch committee meeting. The ballroom sparkles with chandeliers that swing precariously, like your sanity while navigating the leaden expectations of courtship. It's not enough just to twirl your way through waltzes. One must do so while balancing a teacup, an enduring smile and the facade that you aren't entirely miserable. As you spin around the dimly lit room, you witness couples heatedly whispering sweet nothings that are probably highly inappropriate by today's standards. The men, adorned in tight-fitting suits that could cut off circulation at a moment's notice, flash their best winning smiles, despite that unfortunate habit of leaning a bit too close for comfort. Is this romance? Or are they just attempting to smother you in their cologne? Meanwhile, women float about in dresses that resemble elaborate bird cages, teetering dangerously close to an intricate wardrobe malfunction. Next, there's the small matter of navigating social hierarchy. Marrying for love in the Victorian era is as likely as spotting a unicorn in a coal mine. Wealth and status reign supreme. How many young ladies have lost their hearts to charming paupers, only to find them later devoured by the wretched jaws of poverty? If you're a lady of means, romance often means matching wealth with wealth to keep the family estate intact. Nothing gets a heart racing like a dowry. Uniting fortunes doesn't just keep the bank happy, it could save the family name too. Then there's the phenomenon of tragic love stories, perfect for dramatic poetry, but not so great for real life. You swear you've read the same portrait 100 times about young lovers torn apart by fate or scandal. It's like watching a play where everyone dies in the end, and yet, somehow, you find another reason to attend the next performance. Of course, the clandestine affairs send the townsfolk into a frenzy, all while one family pretends to be oblivious as their neighbour sneaks in through the back window. As if that aren't enough, consider the ladies trapped in a cycle of confessing their undying affections to men who don't see them as anything more than the lovely accessory for their dreary lives. Being on the eligible list means dancing witty jabs with the finest, most socially adept gentlemen until they unceremoniously declare their devotion. To their horses, of course, because nothing says love like a man more dedicated to taking care of his steed than to you. And let's not forget the scandalous love letters exchanged behind closed doors. Secrecy is the name of the game, with ink flowing freely while fingers glance nervously over the edges of parchment, convinced the walls have ears. These letters read like confessions, filled with more flattery than any self-respecting person should endure. Who knew that romantic prose could wager a woman's reputation in a way that would make even the boldest souls quiver? The point: love in the Victorian age is a historic disaster, characterised by the most bizarre theatrics of all time. Painful truths emerge in dark corners, and heartbreak is another Tuesday. So, as you retire for the night, nestling into your incredibly uncomfortable bed after a day of frolicking through nonsensical romance, try to remember that in this whimsical world where love often masquerades as utter chaos, at least nobody's asking you to actually take a bath with a goat, or another person just yet. Could it get more absurd? Absolutely. But that's the spirit of romance among the Victorians. Tangled secrets, embarrassing romantic gestures, and mismatched affections waiting to blossom in the unlikeliest of places. As the final curtain falls on today's theatrical exploration of hearts, take a breath and, well, let it out. Hopefully not in the form of dramatic fainting. After all, that's just what the Victorians would do. As the sun sets, the day draws near to a close. In the Victorian era, darkness brings deeper secrets to life. The evening is filled with quiet contemplation, just as much as it's filled with a cacophony of bedbugs sharing your pillow and the faint whispers of your own existential dread. Picture it now. You've settled in your bed, the remnants of your day flickering like gaslight shadows on the walls. The room smells a bit musty, like forgotten hopes and unwashed linens. As you lay there, the noise from the street fades, replaced by the soft sounds of your own imagination running wild. Close your eyes for a moment. Ever wonder what the neighbours are up to at this hour? Is Lady Puddleton knitting with arsenic-laced yarn? Does Mr. Craddock have a new collection of peculiar moles that he measures every night for a prize? With the curtains drawn, the truth of the outside world gets slightly blurred, much like a Victorian painting left out in the rain. But alas, your sleepy thoughts don't stop at your oddball neighbours. No, they wander into the realm of the reclusive inventor across the street, He probably tinkers with machines designed to cook dinner and clean the house. Services he'd probably pay a fortune to avoid. Oh, but let's not forget the audacious thrill of the candlelit gatherings hosted by aristocrats. Layers of gossip drift through your mind like smoke from a fine cigar. Did you hear about the scandal involving Lady Delacour's pet ferret? Or is it true that Lord Hilton has taken his fondness for absinthe too far? You find yourself wondering if you'd prefer to be at one of those glittering events, or if it's safer, cosier, to simply stay tucked in your scratchy sheets. After all, isn't it easier to judge others when you're not at the mercy of their judgment? While lying in your bed, you grapple with thoughts of the day's myriad failures. The cold soup you dare to serve at lunch, your ill-fated attempt to impress the neighbours with your gardening skills that mostly involved inadvertently nurturing the rabbits next door. There's an exquisite irony in feeling like a failure while simultaneously trying to convince yourself that wearing a mouldy old hat is on trend. And this is where the real fun begins. Your mind drifts into the wildest of what-ifs. What if you had that grand painting in the parlour instead of the cat on a surfboard masterpiece? Perhaps then your soirees would rival Mrs. Brookstone's and her extravagant teacup collection. But instead, you'll remain perched among your boring wallpaper and your questionable artworks as the clock ticks, each tick reminding you that clandestine society might have passed you by. Now, let's talk about sleep. The Victorian era is famous for its embrace of poor sleep hygiene. How about a tiny, unsettling thought to ponder? Each night you're indulging in a deliciously thick despondency that drapes over you like that wool blanket you forgot to wash since last summer. Your dreams, a chaotic montage of vapid tea parties, melodrama, and accidentally smashing every single china plate in the house during a rave. Sleep doesn't come easily. It's more reminiscent of navigating a foggy Victorian street, slow, dense, and likely filled with the ghost of your past decisions, not to mention the lingering presence of that untouched turnip pie you promised to eat for breakfast. Every rustle brings a pang of anxiety. Are the ghosts of last week's dinner guests coming back to haunt your cooking skills? Lies, deceit, and burnt biscuits whisper in the corners of your mind, echoing your miserable attempts to put together a meal fit for even the hungriest of house mice. You start hearing it, the loud chatter of society as you single-handedly fight off the clutches of insomnia. The laughter from civil gatherings harkens back to the days when social graces were upheld like a sacred ritual. You can almost picture them. The ladies giggling in lovely gowns, each with a fine mixture of disdain and envy, swirling in their cups of excessively sweet tea. And then, the men with their monocles and lofty opinions, swapping them like cheese platters during a birthday party with no cake. But here you are, nestled in a cocoon of your own making, slipping into the night while contemplating how much better you could do than them. Eventually, sleep tugs gently at the corners of your mind, offering uninterested body parts. Perhaps you'll just drift off dreaming of a world where bedbugs are the least of your worries. So with one last breath, inhale the aromas of cabbage stew and a faint memory, and let go. Embrace the absurdity. You're officially conquered by sleep, embraced by the wacky world of a tucked-in Victorian night. Good luck waking up to survive the morning.